Join us on this 10 miles kayak in Pembrokeshire on the Wales coast from Broadhaven to Martin's Haven. Watch on to learn about the quaint coastal villages of Broadhaven and Little Haven, the amazing scenery along this part of the Pembrokeshire coast, the wildlife you can encounter along this route, the Itiwit inflatable kayak that we used on this trip, the turbulent waters of Jack Sound, and Skomer Island, which is one of the most important havens for marine wildlife in the UK. This 10 miles route on St Bride's Bay on the Pembrokeshire coast took us from Broadhaven down the coast to Martin's Haven. Launching from Broadhaven at 1 PM, we soon passed Little Haven just down the coast. We paddled past stacked rocks before a quick lunch stop at St Bride's Bay. Continuing down the coast, we passed Musselwick Sands before landing at Martin's Haven near to Skomer Island at 5:30 PM. We launched from the wide beach at Broadhaven at 1 PM and headed southwards down St Bride's Bay. In 1977, the area was the scene of alleged UFO sightings and nicknamed the Broadhaven Triangle, in the manner of the Bermuda Triangle. We did pan the skies as we paddled down the coast, but didn't see any UFOs. Just down the coast from Broadhaven is the smaller village of Little Haven. Little Haven was an agricultural, fishing and coal mining area for many centuries. Coal was loaded onto coasters from the beach. We enjoyed great paddling conditions as we kayaked down the coast past magnificent cliffs on a clear aquamarine sea. As we ploughed on down the coast on our inflatable odyssey, we passed some fellow mariners who were out on a small boat enjoying the hot weather. On the day of our trip, the sea swell forecast predicted a westerly swell of 0.6 metres, or about 2 foot every 12 seconds or so. The prediction was for light winds of 5 miles per hour from the southwest, but becoming windless later on. The conditions were meant to be transitioning to a glass sea by late afternoon, and this forecast was pretty accurate, much to our relief. You can't be paddling on a calm, flat sea, especially along the Pembrokeshire coast. It was high tide at 11:30 AM on the day of our trip, so we'd launched about 90 minutes after high tide. The tide was therefore running with us from north to south along the coast. While the tide is generally not that strong on most of the Pembrokeshire coast, it's always better to be paddling in the same direction as the tide if possible. When you get to my age, you need all the help you can get. This journey was part of my undertaking to paddle every section of the 870 or so miles of the Wales coast. Pembrokeshire is one of my favourite parts of the Wales coast to paddle. The scenery is generally stunning, and it's a relatively unspoiled part of the Wales coast, and one of the best sections to see seals, seabirds, and if you're lucky, dolphins. As usual, we hug the coast as we paddle along our route, since we find this conducive to our self-preservation when we go sea kayaking. At times though, we had to weave our way between rocky outcrops while at the same time keeping our eyes peeled for rocks under the surface. We passed a number of seals, but this was one of the few that we managed to actually catch on camera. They're quite elusive animals. We passed stack rocks, not to be confused with the stack rocks which are found on the South Pembrokeshire coast, near to Bosherston. Pembrokeshire can be a bit confusing when it comes to place names, since you often find similarly named places cropping up in different parts of the county. We had to do some more rock dodging as we approached St Bride's, weaving in between rocky outcrops. You obviously have to be more careful with inflatable kayaks when paddling round rocks when compared to using hard shells. Inflatable kayaks are generally quite tough though, and I've brushed up against rocks many times whilst using them. However, you don't want to be too reckless and risk having a puncture, so I usually avoid rocks when using inflatable kayaks if I can. We exchanged pleasantries with another kayaker we passed who presumably had launched from St Bride's Haven. He was using a Verano Canyon inflatable kayak. I looked the Verano Canyon up afterwards, and it can accommodate either 1 or 2 people and has a high pressure drop stage floor similar to the Itiwit X100 kayak that we were using. We approached the inlet at St Bride's Haven, which was the halfway point along our route. We swung into St Bride's Haven, taking care to avoid people swimming in the protected inlet. It seemed to be a good opportunity for a much anticipated lunch and beer stop. The medieval Norman parish church at St Bride's is dedicated to St Bridget. St Bride's Castle is a 19th century baronial style mansion. Regarding logistics, on this trip we left a vehicle at either end of the route. At Broadhaven there is a paying display car park near to the southern end of the beach. At Martin's Haven there is a National Trust paying display car park which is up a short but steep hill from the beach. If you only had one vehicle, then as of the date of this video in October 2025, Bus 400, known as the Puffin Shuttle, runs between Broadhaven and Martinshaven, but only in the summer months. The other options, if you only had one vehicle, may be to try and use the flexi-bus system operated by Pembrokeshire Council, or to book a taxi. On a previous occasion, I'd used a taxi firm based in Broadhaven called Jones Coastal Taxis to take me from Broadhaven to Solva, where I inflated my kayak and then kayak back down the coast to Broadhaven, where I left my car. Alternatives could be to paddle this as one circular 20 miles route, or alternatively to maybe split it into two circular 10-mile routes between Martinshaven, St Bride's and Broadhaven. Regarding dangers and issues, as with any sea kayak, you need to check the weather and sea swell forecast before you go to make sure that the conditions will be safe for paddling. We didn't come across any particularly dangerous tide races or other issues on this route between Broadhaven and Martinshaven. St Bride's Bay is a very wide bay which runs from Ramsey Island near to St David's in the north to Skomer Island in the south. Our destination on this route at Martinshaven was round the corner from Wooltack Point and Jack Sound. Jack Sound is the channel which runs between Skomer Island and the mainland and is oftentimes subject to very turbulent tide races, which makes this channel a potentially dangerous stretch of water to paddle. Ramsey Sound, which runs between Ramsey Island and the mainland at the northern end of St Bride's Bay, is also subject to strong and oftentimes turbulent tide races. However, other than Ramsey Sound and Jack Sound, I have found the rest of St Bride's Bay to be relatively safe and sheltered coastline for paddling, including this route between Broadhaven and Martinshaven. As we made the final push towards Martinshaven, in the distance we could see Wooltack Point, and beyond that Skomer Island and the Garland Stone silhouetted against the horizon. St Bride's Bay can feel a bit like paddling on a big lake due to the headlands at St David's in the north and Wooltack Point in the south, forming a huge semicircle of land. This was our fourth day kayaking in a row, and we had clocked up almost 40 miles of paddling along the Pembrokeshire coast over those 4 days. On this trip we used the 2 or 3 person version of the Itiwit X100 kayak. The X100 is a hybrid single skin PVC kayak with a high pressure drop stitch floor and lower pressure side tubes. The Itiwit X100 kayak is over a metre wide at the widest point in the middle, and it's therefore a very stable inflatable kayak. The trade-off for this stability is that it's a relatively slow kayak and does not track that well. I've done a full review of the 2 or 3 person model of the Itiwit X100 on the product reviews playlist of my channel. While it's called a 2 or 3 person kayak, it can in fact only accommodate up to 2 adults, although a young child could also fit in the middle between them. The X100 also comes in a shorter 1 or 2 person version which is yellow and grey, and I've also done a review of that on the product reviews playlist of my channel. I have unfortunately in the longer term had some issues with build quality on the Itiwit kayak, such as the glue on some of the seams starting to fail, and I've not found it to be as robust as some of the full drop stitch inflatable kayaks that I've used. The end point of our route at Martinshaven was round the corner from Skomer Island. With nearly 350,000 breeding pairs of Manx shearwaters, over 40,000 puffins, thousands of guillemots, razorbills and kittiwakes and hundreds of fulmars, Skomer is an internationally important seabird island. We approached Martinshaven, where we came across a friendly seal who seemed to be fascinated by the drone. I have found seals to be quite interested in my drone, which they seem to think is some sort of strange bird. At 5:30 PM we landed on the beach at Martinshaven after another great paddle on the amazing Pembrokeshire coast. If you enjoyed the video, then please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you haven't done so already by clicking on the left below. Click on the right below to be taken to the playlist of videos of my other trips around the Pembrokeshire section of the Wales coast. Don't forget to check out my website, which is linked below, for blog posts of my trips, product reviews, kayaking guides and other useful information.